Tighnari is the only 5-star Genshin Impact character to be added to the standard banner since the game's release. He has an interesting kit with the fun charge attack playstyle, but before I go over builds and later his gameplay design, it's important to understand how the spread elemental reaction works, as it is pivotal to his entire kit. Many of you probably already know the basics anyway, but there's still some key details that I think are relevant that make reviewing the reaction important for the sake of this video, so please bear with me here. Alright, so spread is a tertiary reaction, which means that it needs to be triggered as the third application of an element on an enemy. If you apply both Dendro and Electro, in either order, an enemy will be debuffed with Quicken, which will last for a short duration. Hitting an enemy with the second Dendro skill while they're in the Quicken state will trigger spread, dealing massive bonus damage that scales with the triggering character's elemental mastery. Furthermore, any Electro damage applied on a quickened enemy will also trigger Aggravate, which deals damage in a similar way as spread. These reactions are generally really easy to set up. Just one application of Electro is enough for Tighnari to trigger spread for his entire combo, whereas reactions like Vaporize or Melt will need consistent reapplication of an aura element. However, both Aggravate and spread damage are subject to specific character internal cooldowns. The damage bonus that spread provides is treated as flat damage, so think Yunjin or Shanhua buffs, and therefore it scales with both the character's critical damage and their elemental damage bonus, but it is completely independent of the skill's proccing ratio and the character's total attack. This is the most technical I'm going to get in the video. I hate having to info dump, but it's key to understand how the system works so we can dive into the rest of his kit. Tighnari is a Dendro DPS whose kit is focused around the spread reaction. Notably, Tighnari is not a hyper carry. A lot of the damage from his teams actually comes from the off-field Electro characters that you're going to have to run in his party. This is because Quicken teams have the benefit of allowing both Dendro and Electro units to trigger damaging reactions. This makes investing into your sub DPS very important when you're playing Tighnari, and it'll help dictate all of his other playstyles moving forward in the video. Similar to Ganyu, Tighnari is a charge attack DPS with a special level 2 shot that summons 4 tiny cluster bombs that will track enemies and deal extra damage. Since all of these bombs apply Dendro, he's not going to be limited by standard internal cooldowns. It should be able to trigger spread at least once with every single shot. However, unlike Ganyu, Tighnari's base time to charge is unbelievably long and arguably useless in combat on its own. This makes him dependent on his elemental skill, which, after applying Dendro and taunting enemies, will grant him 3 stacks that make each charge shot fire much faster. These stacks last for the entire skill cooldown, which is about 12 seconds, and he does not lose the stacks upon switching out to other characters. The taunt also provides Tighnari with a chance to shoot his bow in uninterrupted, without relying on a character like Zhongli. In line with the charge attack theme, Tighnari's ultimate is a single souped up arrow that summons extra cluster bombs. It has a very low 40 energy cost, which is a luxury we haven't seen repeated on many recent characters. The short 12-second cooldown makes it spammable and very fun to use. Tighnari's passive talents are simple stat steroids that, when combined with the signature weapon, will further increase elemental mastery scalings. These extra scalings are all the more reason to build for crit, with the focus around triggering the spread reaction. For artifacts, Tighnari's actually going to have a lot of options. Most 2-piece sets that I have listed here are going to be pretty good on him, and you can just run whatever combination of artifacts have the best substats. If you're a veteran player, by now you likely already have a good 4-piece Wanderer's Troop set, so I'd actually just run that instead of trying to farm a 4-piece Gilded Dream set, as that it's only going to be barely better than Wanderer's Troop and likely isn't going to be worth the resin for most players. However, if Tighnari is your favorite character and you're a huge simp, I would definitely go for it. I also want to add that 4-piece Gilded Dreams is actually going to be dependent on both of your rotations and your team composition. It looks like he really is going to actually want to have a second Dendro if you're going to be running this set, and then also he has to trigger an elemental reaction for him to actually get the buff, which means that you need to use your E in a specific way, otherwise you're going to be losing damage on your first charge shot. And then I would actually avoid farming 4-piece Deepwood, as you could just run any support or second Dendro unit within Tighnari's team and they can just hold the set and trigger it for him. The triggering character doesn't even actually have to be a Dendro unit. You can run this on a Zhongli or a Kokomi or a Bennett or really anyone that you want, and it's going to work perfectly fine. For artifact main stats, you can either run Elemental Mastery or Attack Percentage on the Sands. Both are fine. I would just use whatever has the better substats, but I would very slightly prioritize Attack Percentage. It's going to be a lot easier to obtain, and I think it actually outperforms EM by just a little bit. Unfortunately, having a Dendro Goblet is actually super important. Because spread is all treated as flat damage, having the damage bonus matters a lot. And then obviously for the circlet, you're just going to run crit, whatever gives you a better 1-to-2 ratio. For weapons, obviously his signature weapon, the 5-star Hunter's Path, is going to outperform everything by miles. It's unfortunate, but if you don't have this bow, the options are kind of limited. I would recommend using the highest damaging 5-star weapon that you have. If it's Thundering Pulse or Skyward Harp, it's probably the next best thing. If you're an F2P or don't have any 5 stars, I would actually just use the Slingshot. It's really cheap to level up, and it's probably going to be better than most of the 4-star options in your account. If you have a stringless, it works, but honestly, I would just rather put that on official anyway because it's not going to be super impactful for Tighnari. If you have an invested Hamayumi, which is the 4-star craftable bow from Inazuma, you can just use that instead. But again, I would not craft this weapon. I would just use the slingshot. It's unfortunate that the 3-star weapon is as good as it is, but that's just kind of where we're at right now with this character. Quickly moving on to team compositions, I made a simple chart to help understand who I think should be partnered with. Of course, you don't actually have to play an Electro, an Anemo, and then a Flex unit, but I think it is helpful for the sake of this video that we talk about all the characters from these categories. I'll have some finished team composition examples towards the latter half of this section. Fischl is the most sensible partner by far, as Oz plus her A4 passive can proc Aggravate continuously off-field while dealing decent damage and applying Electro for Tighnari to be able to trigger Spread. She's also a 1.0 character who's been given for free in 2 completely different events, so I think most players are going to actually have her by now. If you're new, Lisa is actually a really excellent choice. She has decent off-field Electro that can shred enemy defense at C0, which is actually a super rare multiplier in Genshin, and then of course Aggravate damage is independent of skill multipliers, so her low damage burst actually doesn't hurt her too much in a Tighnari team. Tighnari is actually really starved of healing characters, so if you're really desperate, you can use Kuki Shinobu. I think her damage is kind of mediocre, and she's not great for reactions either, but she's going to be enough Electro application for spread reactions. Dori is also a choice, but the gimmick behind Dori's kit is that she actually restores energy for your active character, and Tighnari is not somebody who needs a lot of energy because he has a 40 cost burst. So if you're going to pick one, I would pick Kuki. Tighnari actually really wants an Anemo support. Venti works, and Kazuha, especially for Kazuha as C2, is going to be very good, but I actually recommend that most players use the budget option in Sucrose. Sucrose can actually buff Spread directly with her Elemental Mastery transfer, and she can still shred her Electro resistance with the Viridescent Veneer set for her Electro supports. This also lets you hold Kazuha or Venti for the second side in Abyss teams if you're trying to clear Abyss with Tighnari. Of course, if you're still looking for a healing option, both Sayu and Jean are going to be there. I don't recommend them for late game content, but they'll definitely get you through your dailies. For the last slot in the team, I've actually never had any problems running second Electro unit. I think there are a lot of really good options, and you can always pick 2 from the first category. I have a hard time recommending Kole, but she does work, especially if you're super desperate for a character to hold the Deepwood set, or if you're trying to get the Gilded Dreams buff for the attack percentage. If you remember from earlier in the video, we went over what actually increases spread damage. Attack isn't very relevant. This is why I can recommend both Zhongli and Albedo, as they can offer a myriad of buffs that are not necessarily tied to attack. Zhongli has a shield that offers resistance shred and can also protect Tighnari while he's winding up his charge attacks. And then Albedo has a strong 125 elemental mastery buff tied to his burst. And then of course Geo-Resonance is going to be super valuable for the same reason. It offers damage bonus and not attack. Zhongli is also an excellent candidate for holding the Deepwood set because the 4-piece Tenacity attack buff isn't going to be super relevant. However, they're both limited 5-stars, and you'll have to be giving up on running an Anemo support to play them. They're also not super future-proof, as either the Archon or another Dendro unit might end up being stronger options. However, they're definitely great choices if you already have them. They're not going to be listed on this chart, mostly due to species, but Cryo doesn't actually have a Dendro reaction yet, or probably never, so Cryo characters, particularly healers or supports, are going to be great options, especially if you still need somebody to actually carry the Deepwood set. You have to be careful when drafting a Pyro and a Hydro character with Tighnari because those elements can actually screw over the spread reaction with Dendro. You can play Bennett in Tighnari, but Bennett doesn't really want to be paired with a Dendro unit because Bennett doesn't want to trigger Burning, and Tighnari doesn't really want to attack that badly, so it's kind of a poor synergy for both of them, but like I said, if you're desperate, it really does work. Also, Bennett's not a bad option for holding the Deepwood memory set because he doesn't need to bless super badly either with his team composition. So I actually just got done filming the section for Kokomi, and at first I kind of thought she was going to be a terrible pick for Tighnari, but she actually works really well. You just have to be careful that you're applying enough Anemo and Electro to be able to override the Hydro status, so your Tighnari is going to be constantly triggering Bloom with every single of his attacks instead of Spread. I don't believe you can actually trigger both Bloom and Spread with a single damage instance from one of his charge attacks, but if you're able to trigger both, or at the very least you're able to trigger Spread, Kokomi actually works really well. She's also a really great carrier for the Deepwood set, and she's an off-field healer for all your other characters, and as long as you're giving the TTS buff to your official, one of your other characters, I think it's a good choice. Yeah. And then lastly, here are some quick team compositions that you can copy. I'd prefer it if players try to draft their own team compositions, which is why I mostly used that chart earlier, but if you're lazy and just need like a quick pick-me-up, here you go. Okay, so this is where the video is going to change gears. If you just click on this video to try to watch a guide on Tighnari, I am now going to be moving on from the guide section. I'm actually going to be moving on to the section where I'm going to talk about his gameplay design. If you followed me on Reddit, I was responsible for the Why Yoimiya Needs Fixing post, the Electro post, the Write-In post, among a few others. This is going to look a lot more similar to that kind of content. I'm going to try to give my opinion on how Mihoyo designed this character and whether or not I think the gameplay design is good, or if it's fun, or if it's kind of bad. Alright, first, from pure gameplay point of view, I want to go over what I actually like about his kit. For starters, his quick charge shots actually feel super fun to land. Since his charge shots with his E come out so fast, an experienced Tighnari player can be rewarded for having good aim by receiving higher burst damage and faster rotations. We don't really often get characters in Genshin with a lot of skill expression, especially skill expression related to aim mechanics. So more FPS style players might actually really enjoy playing him. And even if you're a mobile player, the faster charge time is less strain on your fingers and easier to manage since you aren't going to be CCing yourself for nearly as long as you were if you were playing a character like Ganyu. Also, if you happen to miss a shot, his cluster bombs will still home onto enemies, and they can still trigger spread without a very large damage loss, so not actually going to be punished very hard for missing. Also, I love how miHoYo designed his elemental skill. It applies the first instance of Dendro to set up your quicken reaction, and then maintaining the E-stacks when you swap off to different characters is really high quality of life that a lot of 4 stars and 5 stars don't actually get in Genshin Impact. The confuse/taunt makes it a lot easier for Tighnari to fire off his charge shots without being interrupted. Honestly, ever since Yoimiya's release, miHoYo has done a pretty good job at including these kinds of mechanics in pretty much every single character they've released. Between Itto, Ayato, and now Tighnari, all of these characters have their own unique way of being resistant to interruption, so they can actually deal their damaging combos. I think a lot of players have inappropriate complaints when they see a character that ascends with elemental damage instead of crit. For Tighnari, it actually makes a lot of sense. You are super starved from elemental damage bonus because of how the spread reaction calculates his damage, as I went over earlier in the video. So having that makes not having a Dendro Goblet a lot less punishing. But Quicken is a super comfortable reaction-based team to play. You don't have to worry about your off-field Electro character stealing your reactions. You don't have to worry about Tighnari stealing the reactions from your off-field Electro characters. Then Spread/Aggravate have really comfortable quality of life for rotating and crafting that Melt setups and Vape setups don't actually have. Only time will dictate whether or not Tighnari is actually to become a staple of Quicken teams or if he's going to end up getting power crept before he's even released. But he's still going to be on the standard banner, so a lot of players are actually going to have access to him and his compositions without having to pull for another unit, so it might end up being worth experimenting with him in the future anyway. Alright, enough complimenting miHoYo. I want to start complaining about this guy now. Tighnari's kit is actually filled with incredibly low base multipliers for all of his abilities. If you aren't triggering spread, his damage basically just plummets right off the moon. This one feels really irritating too, because higher multipliers wouldn't consequently overtune his spread either, since they're independent of each other. All it's doing is making him more dependent on that reaction, and other teams a lot less viable. When I would have much preferred to see the first Dendro 5-star as being more well-rounded, so players are given more comfortable opportunity to test with the new reactions. I tried a burning team, and to be honest, it worked really well. You'll more than likely clear through content playing this, and you'll have a pretty easy time doing so. But this isn't because of the burning reaction or Tighnari's own damage, it's because you're running a Shunlane Bennett Kazuha setup, and those characters deal immense damage by themselves and have broken synergy. Literally anyone is going to perform well on that comp. Why play it anyway though, right? Well, it feels dishonest to recommend it in any kind of meta point of view. Shunlane and Bennett would benefit a lot more from a different character acting as the on-field driver, and Tighnari himself will deal a lot more damage in a team focused around spread. Burning also scales with only elemental mastery, not crit, so either need to do hyper-specific rotations to ensure that the full EM unit on your team is actually the one triggering the burning, or you need to build everyone as full elemental mastery, which isn't something Tighnari really wants to do himself. You can try drafting Bloom teams as well, but I think of the 3 Dendro characters that we have in the game currently, Tighnari is actually going to be the worst at this, because his Dendro application comes in really short bursts, and then basically not at all for several seconds afterwards. Whereas Cole and Dendro Traveler offer more utility and also have more consistent Dendro application. And then again, you're just going to be running into the same problem with the Burning team, where Tighnari's damage is going to be super low and very unimpactful. If you're playing Tighnari, you likely want to play Tighnari in a way that's going to make him deal damage and him as the carry, and this just isn't how you do it. I'm super disappointed that miHoYo designed the first Dendro 5-star to be pretty much only a spread carry exclusively. We could have easily released a stronger unit that was capable of being an enabler or driver for all 3 of the core Dendro reactions. This would have been an amazing thing for the community, as we could have been given more freedom to test with the new content, and would have been good marketing for miHoYo to sell their new character. One could argue that they want to save the Burning or Bloom Dendro DPS for future characters, but current rumors speculate won't get another Dendro DPS for months at best. I feel like miHoYo really just wanted to design a unit that would go into the standard banner and didn't want that unit to cover too many bases, so they gave Tighnari the most limiting Dendro kit ever. Only works for Quicken teams, it only really works for spread Quicken teams, as his ability to enable Electro units is pretty limited. Moving on, there are a few other small complaints that I want to make about his kit. I've said it a few times before in the video, but Tighnari's charge attack without his E-stacks feels completely miserable. It takes several times longer to charge than other charge attack based units, and the entire time you can just be interrupted. There's absolutely no reason for miHoYo to limit it like this, other than to sell his honestly pretty weak C6, which I'm going to talk about more later. Tighnari's burst honestly has me pretty confused. I don't hate it, all it is just one big souped up charge shot, and having a lower cooldown and energy cost is definitely something that I've missed since the game's launch. However, using it always feels super underwhelming. Spread ignores skill multipliers, so the bursts feel like it does similar damage to the charge attack anyway, just for the energy cost and 12-second cooldown. Also, it doesn't refresh his E-stacks, it doesn't give Tighnari any team buffs. Honestly, I just would have liked it to see it do anything else. Other 40 cost bursts in the game usually offer some utility. Albedo has 125 elemental mastery buff, Zhongli's rock will stun enemies, and even Kachin gets a 15% crit rate buff for the rest of her kit. While I've mostly had positive things to say about his elemental skill, I still wish that it could reapply Dendro or at least have some off-field Dendro application. This would make him more suitable as a sub DPS, sure, but it would also make missing the ability a lot less punishing. This is exaggerated by the pretty egregious 12-second cooldown. I often find myself waiting for the ability to come back after doing quick rotations just so I can use my shard shots again. I'm not sure what the right way to tune the numbers on this skill was, but as it currently stands, I don't really love the way that it feels. Tighnari is also deceptively single target focused character. While his level 2 charge shot can hit multiple enemies, they aren't actually dealing any AoE damage. His elemental skill is technically AoE as well, but it's more utility focused and damage focused, and it's usually going to be proccing this quicken reaction and not actually triggering spread. I don't want to get too much into the meta conversation, but we all know that he's not going to be competing with single target carries such as Hu Tao or Raiden Shogun. I want to really quickly talk about his constellations. His C1 is a solid 30 CV, so it's going to be about as good as the crit substats on a decent but not insanely strong artifact. However, it's crit rate, not crit damage, which actually conflicts with his signature weapon, which also gives crit rate. With this constellation, you're going to need a disgusting amount of crit damage from artifact substats, which makes it really annoying in my opinion. C2 is more Dendro damage bonus, which is good because you really need a lot of Dendro damage bonus for a spread character, but it actually is not going to be a significant amount of Dendro damage bonus for it to matter so much, especially for going all the way to C2 on a character. C4 is what I wish was already integrated into his kit at C0. It just makes it so his burst will give his party all 60 elemental mastery, which is fine, but all the way for a Constellation 4 is, in my opinion, pretty weak. And his C6 is really weird. It's technically two separate buffs. The first buff is going to lower the base charge shot cooldown, which is something that I complained about several times throughout the video, but I'm not sure if it lowers it enough for it to actually feel a lot better. I'd actually have to own it and test it to be able to figure that out. The other part is that in theory it's rather strong, but honestly in practice it's not that good. It lets him trigger 5 of his little cluster bombs instead of 4 for every single shot, but he's already able to trigger spread twice with every charge shot anyway, so I'm not really confident in this constellation either. I think overall his constellations are actually rather weak. I would not pull for these. If you happen to get them, all of them technically are buffs, but they're not very large buffs at all. I feel like Tighnari is the most I'm going to be put on the standard banner next patch character of all time. He's fun, he has an interesting gimmick, and he's great for the Sumeru world exploration, but there are a lot of things that are holding him back from being a strong contender for Genshin Impact's meta. As it currently stands, I have 36-star Abyss with him, but my supports are very wailed, and I have his 5-star bow, which makes a big difference in his damage. I think the average player should only consider investing in him if you have the strong Electro supports to make him work, otherwise I'd probably avoid the investment.